Firstly, Ghadi Mubarak to all of you before we start the book club, especially if it's already started in your time zone or if it's starting soon. Eid Ghadi Mubarak to all of you, inshallah. But with that, let's begin with the book club, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب الله العالمين أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى على بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الآن إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum again to everyone here in the book club. Here we are in the 9th session of the Nahjal Balagha book club here with the Ahlul Bayt Society with ABSOC. So alhamdulillah, it's great to be here, to spend this time with you, inshallah. And like I said before, Eid Ghadin Mubarak to all of you. I pray that this most auspicious day that we have is one which brings joy to all of you, inshallah, and success, inshallah. We have a book club to go through today, and I'll go through it. But I wanted to share a thought I had just before. I was reflecting just before this book club on Sayyidah Zainab sallallahu alayha, because the Karbala live stream was on, and I was just kind of listening along while researching and praying for the book club and all of these things. And they played the ziyarah of Sayyidah Zainab. In fact, they play it quite often in the Haram of Imam al-Hussein in the live stream, right? So I'm listening to it, and the reciter's kind of going through the martaba, the level of Sayyidah Zainab, and how great she was, and is mentioning that you are the daughter of Rasulullah, like you are among that group, you are the daughter of Sayyidah Khadija sallallahu alayha, and you're the daughter of Bi Fatima, and she's going through all the things, and it made me think of like what is the finest moment for Sayyidah Zainab, because it's not clear to me when we see her like at her the opportunity where she was able to be herself the most freely, right? Or where she demonstrated, not freely, the extent of her greatness, given her various kind of life experiences. When do we see her greatest moment in all her trials and tribulations? So there's an argument to be made that, well, maybe it's Ashura itself, right? Where, she, every time she is assisting Abu Abdullah and helping Imam al-Hussein, and either taking her own children or allowing children she has raised to go and fight and die in the battlefield. And that's a real test for her. That's a test for the motherhood of her, right? And there is no greater challenge for a mother than for pain to be suffering for their child. So I can't look past that moment. But then the reciter goes on to speak about the tribulation she goes through after Ashura. It's in the form of Masai, but if you think about it, what about the moment after Abu Abdullah, has been killed, has been shaheed, and she has been given this role where she has witnessed what's happened, and she stays strong and has now assumed leadership. And she has to show this in a very immediate way. She has to take care of Imam Sajjad. She has to look after the women and children. She has to become the leader. In that moment when she has to decide that she has to take this responsibility, and she's not an imam in the way that Imam Sajjad is an imam, where this is part of her mandated role in terms of her wilayah, of wilayah tashri'i, for example. That's not what she's got. She has something like an amana where she's got to take care of Imam Sajjad and take care of Imam and keep the imam alive. In crude terms, keep the imam alive until he can kind of extend his message later on in his life, because Imam rested on a very delicate balance at that time, right? So maybe that's her greatest moment, just after Ashura. But then you have the journey. You have the journeys from Karbala to Kufa, and later on. That particular journey is arguably one of the hardest ever journeys we've seen. Now, its time is shorter than the journey from Kufa to Sham, right? But in that journey, we read in Masaib about the tragedies of the children who were falling and dying. We read, the dhulm of the enemies of Abdullah, how they were targeting children. Like, if there's ever a place to test someone's resolve, it's the heat of that moment, of that journey. And often we're told in narrations, if you want to know a person, look at how they are in a journey, especially if you travel with them, you see them in a journey. So maybe in that journey, in the way she assumes leadership, we see it then. But when she gets to Kufa and she speaks to Ibn Ziyad, and we have that famous speech, some people say these are the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib which are being spoken, that level of eloquence. And that occurs to me because we're going through Nahj Balagha and we're going through the words of the Imam, right? And we're going to go for a sermon today. And I thought, well, in that sermon, when people could no longer distinguish in form between her words and that of Imam Ali alayhi salam, that seems like she has in her own personal development, like that's something of a peak. Okay. But then she goes through a extension of the same experience. She goes on an even harder journey in other degrees to Sham. And she has to speak in front of, as the sermon, um as the narration was saying, the ashq min ashqain or ashq min ashq al-awwalin min akhirin or ashq al-akhirin min awwalin, like the great evil one, yani Yazid. And she is told, Kaif, how did you find the tragedy of your brother? And she says those lines which live with us eternally, Ma ra'ayta illa jamila. I saw nothing but beauty. And my current position is this is her finest moment where she says that line, where she's shown like, what are you made of? Like, what is your resolve? Is it real after everything? And you look back and what have you gone through? To then see beauty after all the previous experiences, to me, like that seems like her greatest moment. And that speech and that moment where she speaks against the tyrant, that seems so entirely distinct from anything like that has been expected or called or non imams have been asked to do for this religion. And I'm not going to say the Fatima Samaya, like in terms of those who are not imams who've been through suffering for this religion, they don't often ask their companions to go through the challenges or to, we don't see like, okay, this is your moment now, this is your key responsibility. But when she says that, a lot of is demanded of her, where the mother could speak or the child could speak or the auntie could speak or the sister could speak, but no, the daughter of Ali speaks, right? And then she shows what she's made of. Now there's arguments to be made that no, it's the fact that after this moment she carries on living with this grief and continues to be herself throughout all of it, continues to have love for Allah and for children and kindness back in Medina and her whole life. So it's what she does with the experience which she takes back from her. Do you see now where I can't choose what is her finest moment? Like every time I think it could be one, there are so many arguments that this is peak Sayyidah Zainab. This is her being herself, challenged, tormented, put under intense suffering, and she comes out with moments of beauty. And she truly is Rasulullah's daughter. But every time there's another one, which makes me think, well, maybe that's her greatest moment. I didn't really have a question after this. Well, maybe if you listen, like, I don't know, do you have a certain moment in her life which you think that, no, this is where I see who she is? Like, do you have that? Maybe, I don't know. I didn't really prepare anything for this, but if you have any thoughts, please do share. But that's what I was thinking. I was thinking of how great this lady is, where we cannot point at what is her greatest moment, because each moment signifies another level of magnificence, really. Khair, by way of introduction and by way of thought, we now come to the Nahj Balagha book club. So we are looking at sermon 23. Now, this sermon has some context in our general discussions, which is that we're looking at the idea of moral decision making. We've gone through different examples of what that means. And like I was mentioning on the WhatsApp group earlier, today and next week being the last two, we're looking at practical examples of that, like actual instances where we have seen or we are supposed to apply these tools for interacting with people. So I've worked at the soul. I've, done zuhd, I've done abstinence. I've tried really hard to work on myself, not be too guided by this dunya, take what provision I can, but not be misled or living for its sake. Like we've taken what Imam Ali has offered us. So now we see it in practice. Sermon 23 really discusses the mentality of altruism. What is the mindset of being someone who helps others? And as I'm going to go through the sermon, we'll go through the whole sermon because it's not too long. We'll see practical examples of what it means to show your social role in the way the Imam expects from you. And not just as a friend to one person, but in general to multiple groups, to your kin, to your ashira, as we'll come through, to your family, to those who are wealthy and those who are poor. And you show how dynamic the social responsibility and the ethical system is in Islam. And inshallah, next week, we'll then look and transition this to the widest possible area of politics, where we look at leadership and governance, where how am I meant to act if I'm in power, or if someone is in power and I'm under them, what should my conduct be towards them? And we look at that famous letter from Imam Ali Islam to Malik al-Ashtar, in which we go through some of these discussions. And that next week, inshallah, will be the last one of this book club. I can't go through everything, but I'll try and select out some of the most important and famous and celebrated parts of that sermon, of that letter. But today is sermon 23 of Nahjal Balagha. So if you have it in front of you, if you're taking notes, I'm going to go through it in a few moments. And before I start, can I just see by way of hands if you have it in front of you, or if you like, if everything's okay with the sermon, that I know you found it. Like if it was all cool, just like raise your hand or give a message or something, just so I feel a little bit reassured that that everyone's okay. So good, mashallah. I see said Hashim. Everyone else okay with the sermon? Like, was it all cool? Did you find it? Did you have a chance to read it? I don't know. Put your hand up if you did. Or private message or group message. Okay, okay, good. Fine. Thank you, you guys who mentioned. If you've not, now's a good chance to go through it, inshallah. So, Sermon 23, the link that Brother Muhammad very kindly put in the chat, begins in the following way. The Imam begins by saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma ba'du. Now then, let me say, فَإِنَّ الْأَمْرَ يَنْزِلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ كَقَطِّرِ الْمَطَرِ. Indeed, the divine orders of Allah are descending from the heavens to the earth, just like drops of rain. So the amr of Allah, the order of God, descends like raindrops. إِلَى كُلِّ نَفْسٍ, upon everyone. بِمَا قَسِمَ لَهَا, who is destined for what they are going to receive. مِنَ الزِّيَادَةِ أَوْ نُقْصَانٍ, whether you receive plenty or little. Right? So when it rains, sometimes it drizzles and sometimes it pours in raining. Sometimes you get ziyada, sometimes you get nuqsan. Sometimes you get a little, sometimes you get a lot. So the Imam begins by saying, whatever is destined for you, you receive from God like raindrops, whether you receive a little or plenty. It's all intended by Allah, right? فإذا رأي أحدكم لأخيه غفيرا في أهل أو مال أو نفسي فلا تكونن له فتنة. So if you see someone from among you who has a lot of mal or a lot of ahl, a lot of wealth or family, or binafsi, or in themselves, they just have a lot. Don't worry for them, wala fitnatan. Don't have any corruption against them. And if don't feel jealous against them for what they have. فإن المرء مسلما ما لم يعش دناعة تظهر فيخشع لها إذا ذكرت. I should actually stop here by saying, so long as a Muslim does not commit an act which, if people knew about it, he would bend his eyes in shame, ويغرى بها ويغرى بها أنعام الناس, and the people will become, he'll become low in the eyes of the people. If people do those kind of deeds, a Muslim should not be doing those kind of deeds by looking at what others have, right? So if someone else has much, I should not then start doing evil deeds out of jealousy, that why God did you not give to me? And why did you give so much in terms of family, wealth, and to the self of that person? And by withholding to me, I now feel despondent and I commit sins. I do actions which are dana and which are low from me. Imam is saying that don't do those things. And if someone does, he says, as long as a Muslim doesn't commit these acts where they bend their eyes in shame, if it had been disclosed min nas to the people, el nas, then they'll find, if they don't, they'll find themselves an example. Kana kalfalij الياسرشة الذي ينتظر أول فوزة من قضائه توجب له المغنم. They are like, he says, a gambler who draws the first arrow that he has, قضائه توجب له المغنم. And in drawing the first arrow, he hopes it will win for him. It will secure his aim. And that's his hope. He doesn't know, right? وَيَرْفَعُ عَنْهُ بِهَا الْمَغْرَمِ. And hopefully he thinks that that one next arrow he pulls will cover up the arrow which he lost with before, like a gambler. He has no control over his fate. These people are those that are not doing what the Imam is saying. They are committing actions which are low and which they are bad, but they're hoping that by it being covered by Allah, it will never be revealed to the people. That's their hope. And they're like gamblers, saying that one day people think I'm great, another day people think I'm low. And hopefully today they see randomly by chance that good deed in me. And that low thing which I did because I was jealous, because I did not trust Allah, is hidden from me. Right? Now, this immediately is actually a mental state the Imam wants us to get in for the rest that's to come. It's to say, well, where do you get your benefits from? You get it from Allah. You get it from God. Just like there's rain. Now, sometimes it rains heavily in one area, and sometimes it rains very a little bit in another area. Our role is not to get angry at the one who sends the rain. Our role, the Imam is suggesting here, is to not do fitna when another person gets something which you don't get. Don't have jealousy, right? Now, there's a verse of Quran which one of the Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, the scholar, when commenting on this section, mentioned this verse of Quran of Surah Nisa, verse 54. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أم يحسدون الناس على ما آتاهم الله بما فضله. Are you going, do they have envy? Do they have hasad on the bounty which Allah sent them? They're talking about the descendants of Ibrahim. فَقَدْ آتَيْنَا آلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ, and we gave to Ibrahim al-kitab wal-hikmata wa-آتَيْنَاهُمْ مُلْكًا عَظِيمًا. We gave Ibrahim this book, his house. We gave them wisdom. We gave them this great mulk, this great kingdom. So why do they have envy for those who have other things, right? That's Surah 4, verse 54. Meaning that this mentality of I'm going to get jealous if I don't get what I need is found throughout history. And people do evil deeds because they don't get what they think is their right. Okay. This is a good place to start and get in the frame the Imam wants us to be in. He wants us to be in thinking Allah is the origin of all your deeds. So later on, when someone's rich or someone's poor, and I've got to choose how I should act against them, I'm not hating God. I'm not going back to God and saying, why am I poor and he rich? Or why is that person better than me in this thing? No, no, no. I understand that Allah gives and withholds as He wishes. Okay. Here I'll pause and say, um, for those of you who are following on in this first paragraph, what do you think is the wisdom of Allah withholding things from you, whereas He might give to others? Like, what is the benefit from that? Because it could be easy to say there is some benefit, but not get it. Because if we don't get it, it'll just be some idea we believe, but it's never something we understand. So I'll ask you, if there is something which another person has more than you, what do you gain in what is lacking in what Allah gives to you? If Allah gives less wealth to you, or less family to you, or less to your nafs, these three examples, what is He actually giving you in His silence, do you think? What do we think? If the question is not clear, I can say it again. Said Hashim, Assalamu alaikum. Maybe it's clear because you have something to say, inshallah. What do you think, Allah?
I think many things could be said here, but possibly to test you, to see how you deal with the people who actually have those things, to see if you thank for what are the things that you already have other than this. Yeah, many things I think could be said here.
Well, you've mentioned multiple things. You mentioned the idea of it being a test, which is one answer, where not being given something is a test that how do you deal with that thing. And then it's also a way of being thankful as well. If you're thankful, you increase. So it's the idea that if God withholds, He will give more if I thank Him for what I have already. And then He'll give more. Same with the risk as well,
And the third point I remembered now that was in my mind was also, it might not have been good for you. Something that is given to someone else, even if it's from the outside, possibly might be good, maybe specifically for you. It wouldn't yield in good results. Yeah, there are also many stories like that.
Yeah, and of course in the Quran as well, that you may like a thing that, when it was jihad was prescribed on the believers and they were complaining, it was, well, you may dislike a thing that's good for you, you may like a thing that's bad for you. Allah knows what you do not. And that principle extends to so many examples, like you mentioned, where I think something is for me so much, but when the time comes, if I had got that thing, it would have led me astray, right? Excess in these things I'm mentioning, in mal, in ahl, or in sifat nafsihi, are all examples. If I got more wealth, maybe I would have been misguided, and that wealth would take me way away from God. If I got more family, maybe those children would have been a source of corruption, or I would be too attached to them and not love them for the sake of God, as unfortunately we have many examples in our traditions of. And similarly, if it was my nafs, if I was given more and more and more, that would have caused me to have arrogance, for example. So you're right. This point is one we have to always keep reminding ourselves. So thank you, inshallah, dear Said, for making it. Sister Zainab has also added a comment. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Zainab. By not getting something we desire, we should still maintain our trust in Allah. Through this trust with Allah, we realize that perhaps we don't need those things. Exactly. what you actually get is trust. Like in that gap, you get something, and that is the trust in Allah that He knows what is best for me. So if there's a transaction being made, it's not a material transaction of what are you giving me, God? It's I already have your trust. Now you will give me what you want. And if you give me nothing, I will strengthen my trust in you. Right? I don't expect from God that He must answer me with exactly what I'm asking. I just want Him to listen. I just want Him to hear me. And you're right, like that relationship is more important than the consequence of it. Because we're not business people who pray to God because we want certain things. Our transaction is not with this kind of expectation of God that God, because I came to you, you have to give me what I asked for. Whereas the non-Muslim who didn't even come to you, you give to him. It's not like that. It's the relationship which is more important. And like you mentioned, trust of God is so much more important. Um, so Zainab, if you want to add anything to what I mentioned, if there's something you want to clarify or respond to it, please do, inshallah. Sister Fatima has written, Assalamu alaikum again to Sister Fatima, lesser responsibility on distributing the money appropriately. Hang on. Okay. So what do you mean this in relation to? Do you mean by not being, okay. So you mean like when you are given wealth and money, you have less of a responsibility to distribute it, as if you are wealthy when you do have extra added حقوق where you have to give that wealth more to those who are poor. So like if you're poor, for example, right, I get you. Thank you. So if you're poor, it's a good point. You don't need to give as much wealth. You might give the same proportion of your wealth, for example, but that's not as much monetarily as the one who's giving their khums when they are a millionaire or a multi-millionaire. And similarly, we do have a social responsibility in Islam where if you are wealthy, we distribute the wealth back into the community to those who are poor. But if you're poor yourself, there's less of a duty to give to other poor people. There is still a duty, by the way, that even poor people must give to those who are poorer than them. It needs to keep filtering down and down and down in the ideal Islamic system until the lowest low. So the mustata'afin, the weak people, the those who are weak in the land, they can build themselves up, inshallah, with the help of others. But you're right. You're right. The more that you are given, the more you have a duty to do with it. The more children you're given, the more children you're expected to send to the battlefield. The more knowledge you have, the more you have to share it with others. And the more wealth you have, of course, is the best example where the more you have to distribute it. Great example. So as you can see, and if anyone else wants to add a point, now is a great time to, inshallah. But as you can see, it's in the silence of Allah giving to us and not giving to us where we learn the lessons sometimes. If we were just receiving constant, every time we do dua, we get, we wouldn't have a time to pause and reflect on why we are relating to God. He'd just be a infinite vending machine. But no, this is a relationship. And in a relationship with someone, you don't always get exactly what you want. But it should be built on foundations which help you grow. And one of them is muhabba of Allah. One of them is that idea of amana, of ni'mah, of trust, um, of insaf, of justice. All these things are relevant. So good. Inshallah, I'm glad that inshallah that point has been made. Alhamdulillah. Any other points on this before I move on to the next section? Awesome. So, I thought I heard something. Okay. So Imam continues with the same idea that people are not the same. Okay. That um, some Muslims might get lots, some might not get much. Right. And he continues. كذلك الأمر المسلم بريء من الخيانة ينتظر من الله إحدى الحسنين. Similarly, he says, there's a Muslim who is free from dishonesty. بريئة من الخيانة. They don't have dishonesty. The Muslim who's free from dishonesty will always expect two hasanain, two good things. Anything that comes to them, they'll think this is either one of two things. أما داعي الله فما عند الله خير له. Either it's a call from God, and anything which is from Allah is good. So whatever happens, it's God calling you to do something or to be something. Even death, even someone dying is da'a ila Rabbi, it's a call back to God, right? So either they'll see everything as just a conversation with Allah where He's calling to me, or it's a rizq from Allah. It's receiving some sort of livelihood or benefit from. Rizq can be translated in different ways. فإذا هو ذو أحل ومال ومعه دينه وحسبه إن المال البنين حرث الدنيا والعمل الصالح حرث الآخرة وقد يجمعهم الله الأقوام. for that person, either they're getting a call from God or they're receiving risk from God. Everything is like that. Even not receiving something is risk, because risk from Allah can even be to not receive bala, to not receive punishment. That can be a risk, right? Life can be a risk. A second of good health can be a risk, and we're receiving those things from God. They see everything as one of those two things. Either God's saying something to me or He's giving something to me. Now, the one who's receiving risk from Allah, the Imam says, إما رزق الله فإذا هو ذو أهل ومال. If they already have children and property, they have these things already. So they don't need those things anymore. ومعهد, and with them is دينه وحسبه. And they already have, and with them is their religion and is their respect. They have all of these things, right? Then the verse ends by saying, وَقَدْ يَجْمَعَهُمُ اللَّهُ الْأَقْوَامِ. Sometimes God gives both things to one people. He gives you that religion and that faith, and He also gives you money and wealth. Like He gives you both. He gives you both. And there's benefit to both those things, wealth in this world and wealth in afterlife. And that's what's in between, right? That's the example where He says, إِنَّ الْمَالِ وَالْبَنِينَ. Indeed, your wealth and your children, حَرْثُ الدُّنْيا. They are like a plantation in this world. They grow in this world and they have a benefit in this world. There's a value to them having, money and children, for example. وَعَمَلُ الصَّالِحِ, and good deeds that we do is حَرْثُ الْآخِرَةِ, is a plantation for akhirah. So all we're doing is planting, really. All we're doing in this world is just planting seeds of our actions and our knowledge. علم and amal. Sometimes we plant actions by having wealth in this world and children in this world, and they grow and blossom, and we taste the fruit in this world. Then we can I also do amal salih, good deeds. And those good deeds that we do become harf, become an investment for akhirah, where we plant them now, but the benefit comes later. For example, with that same wealth you give charity. Now you might not see the reward of that charity in this world, although some ulama believe you do see all of it, at least a reflection of all of the consequences of actions in this dunya. But you're not going to see the full extent of the reward which is due to you. But you see it in akhirah. That's the investment. And similarly, with children, if you teach your children knowledge and you die, for example, children can become a form of sadqiyya jariyah, right? If they are doing good deeds for them and attributing them to their parents. So you might be in akhirah, actually in barzakh, just chilling out in alam al-mithal, in the world of ideas of mithal in barzakh. Either you are gaining something or you are in your grave. We don't really know what it looks like, but we know that it's extremely visual. And at some point, your level increases because someone on earth did some good deed which affects you now. They planted a tree, or they wrote a book in your name, or they did a good deed, or they recited Surah Fatiha, whatever it is. We have ulama who believe, they've discussed that the good deeds of someone in the world can affect you in akhirah. That investment was for the afterlife, just like all your deeds are going to become more apparent to you in akhirah. That's an investment. And the interesting thing is sometimes وَقَدْ يَجْمَعَهُمَ اللَّهُ الْأَقْوَامِ. Sometimes God gives you both. You don't have to choose between poverty and God. Allah will give you wealth of this world and akhirah. And there are some people who are like this, where Allah rains abundantly on them, rizq fi dunya wa fil akhirah. Rizq which benefits you in this world and in the afterlife. I don't want to speak too far, but I would assume that all of us here can be in that group, especially if you're living in the West, where we are already in monetarily in the wealthiest part of the world, or if you're living, if you're from a family from the West, for example, right? Meaning your family's originally from the East, but you're now in the West, where there's more wealth, uh, disparatively. And let's say you're young, you have life, you have, inshallah, everyone here has health to have a long life. If that's the case, and I know I'm assuming, but if that is the case, you already have more than most people on this earth are going to get. If the average salary is $2 in the world, which is below minimum wage in the UK, in America, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, in all the Western countries that you might be in, I'm already at an advantage in terms of money. And if we're young, inshallah, and our health is good and we have the chance to have children and families, and if not families, then at least friends and all the good stuff of life. A lot of people don't have that. A lot of people our age or our age and younger will live and die without having that secure family life. We already have those things. It's already been given to us. We cannot complain to God for not having these things. So if we do lose a family member or I do have a bad investment, That's the up and down. That's the rain coming and going. But I've already been given enough to plant the seeds that I need to. And if I plant it for God, that's up to me. If I plant it for Akhirah, that's up to me too. But I think we're in a good position to make some real progress for our souls. I don't know if we are the same crowd the Imam was talking to then, but we can take such wisdom from this, inshallah. Okay. Any questions or comments about this section or anything which I mentioned about this second part, about this paragraph? No? Do I have to ask a question to see if it's understood? Here's a good question. And this does have answers in our hadith, but also it's logical, right? For some reason in our hadith, prophets have been told this, awliya have been told this, and we have been told this, that your children can be a proof, a hujjah against you in akhirah. Okay? And it comes up here as well, where children and property are plantations for this world. So it's not necessary that your children take you to akhirah. We have so many examples. Prophet Nuh and his son, Laysa minkum, he's not from you anymore. We have imams whose sons and daughters were not good to some degree. We have um, a hadith that you'll be questioned for your children, and sometimes their wrongdoing can be attributed back to you, right? Which indicate this. Why? Why do you think that children can be a source of misguidance for their parents? Like, what does it look like? That's what I'm more interested in. What does it look like for a child to be a source of sin for the parents, or for you to have a child and that child not to take you towards God, or not to have the ideal version where you raise a child, give them an Islamic name, and teach them how to pray, and their good deeds, like Imam Sadiq says, Imam Sajjad says, are ascribed back to you. Not that version. What's the other version we're being warned about, where a child can cause harm to your akhirah? What do you think that looks like? It's actually a very important point to know, I think, about what could go wrong if I don't handle a child properly, or I am not a good child to my parents. What are the consequences in akhirah? Who has some ideas? What does it look like for a child to take their parents away from God, like in front of our eyes? Or what examples of this that we should be wary of someone who's not using them for the sake of God, who's not using their family for the sake of God? So I'll give one example to get you going then. Hub, love. Okay. Love of children should come from, in some ways, the love of Allah. That they are from God, they are an amana from Allah. Allah is the Khalik, the creator of them. Um, and they have rights which should be respected for the sake of God. Okay. Now, if I forget that and I start thinking that, well, because I am the parent of this child, their huquqa to me, their rights are to me, and I created them and I have ownership and possession over them. Or the other way, the toxic way, is that's a toxic way. Or if I love a child so much that I'd be willing to commit a sin for that child, I'll be willing to give that child or allow that child to do wrongdoing, which is against this religion, just because I love them and because I love them, in an absolute sense, right? That child's doing something wrong. It's oppression because it's my child and I own them. I allow it. Then sin is being done, and it's being justified for the sake of a parent loving their child. And I think we see examples of this. We see examples where parents will not um, parents will not keep their child on the path of Allah just because they love them. They will not guide them anymore just to keep them close to them. Unfortunately, I see this around me, and maybe you have seen it around you in your community as well, where the love of a family becomes in the way of the love for God. Whereas the ideal version is, because you love Allah, you have more love for everyone around you, including your family and your friends and your community, right? So there's one example. There's one example. Um, yeah, or jobs, for example, right? I would rather my child earns money and is secure and has money in this world. It's not relevant to me if that job is in haram or halal rizq. What's relevant to me is they're secure and when I leave this world, I know for a fact they're going to have money. Yeah, but money at what cost? Mal at what cost? Wealth at what cost? Risk, there's no risk or barakah in that, right? So there's another example. See, I'm giving two. Can anyone give a third of an example where a child does some sin which the parent tolerates um, in the way that we are arguing against, which is wrong. No? Well, inshallah, please think about this for when you are having going to have children, inshallah, so that you are ready, inshallah. Okay? Um, okay. So the Imam mentions that wealth and children can be our plantation for akhirah, harath for akhirah. And he keeps going. Um, so if you're reading to the third paragraph down in the sermon, فَاحْذَرُوا مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا حَذَّرَكُم مِّن نَفْسِهِ. Have caution, be aware from God for the very things He has told you to have caution for. So be wary of God because He has told you to be wary of certain things. وَخْشَوْهُ خَشْيَةٌ لَيْسَةُ لَيْسَةُ بِتَخْذِيرِ وَعَمَلُهُ فِي غَيْرِ رِيَاءٍ وَلَا سُمْعَةٍ. This is interesting. And be afraid of Him, have a khashya, khawf of Him, um, to the extent that you have no i'tidar, no excuse against him anymore. So you're so scared and have fearful of disobeying him, you don't need to look for excuses for why you disobeyed him. That fear motivates you. وَأَعْمَلَهُ فِي غَيْرِ رِيَاهِ وَلَا سُمْعَهُ. And act, do amal in such a way that it's not for riyah, not for show, and la sam'ahu, and not so that people have heard that you did a good deed. That's no longer relevant for you anymore. Whether people see it, whether people are impressed with your actions, with your amal. فإن من يعمل لغير الله يكله الله إلى من عامله له عمل له. If someone asks for other than Allah, they want something but they ask someone else who's not God, Allah then entrusts them. من عمله له, whoever you ask from, go to him. So if I place all my hopes, they start and end with my employer for rizq, or they start and end in my school, that my degree is going to get me money, or they start and end. By end, I mean that this is my risk is coming from my qualification, it's coming from my job, it's coming from my family. If it ends with them, which is غير Allah, يُكِلُّ اللَّهُ إِلَى مَنْ عَمْلَ لَهُ. Allah will give you, and actually He entrusts you back to that person. Yeah, and go and get from them. Then they're the one who gives to you. That's the wrong type of wish to make. The right type of dua to make, which the Imam actually makes next, is he actually makes a dua which is rare to do at this stage. نسأل الله منازل الشهداء ومعايشة السعداء ومراقبة الأنبياء ومرافقة الأنبياء. We ask Allah, نسأل Allah, please give me the maqam of the shuhada. Let me be like them, those who have laid their life for this religion. ومعايشة السعداء, and those people who are the people of virtue and sa'ada. They have been fortunate in what Allah has given them. Murafaqatul Anbiya. And they are the prophets, or they are like the prophets, and they are friends of the prophets. Let me have that. That is how I should try to be. Those three groups, the martyrs, those who are close and fortunate with God, and those who are the prophets. Not those people who do actions just for the sake of riyah or sam'ahu, for the sake of show, and so that people have heard that I did a good deed. This is part of the mentality of the believer. And now I'm looking at positive social circles to surround myself with. You see how we're expanding from the one person to many now? We looked at livelihood and children property. Now I'm looking at me. How do I link myself to others? If I put myself in an environment with those people um, who make excuses to God, who don't have fear of God, who don't have caution of God, la yahdharuhu, they don't have any awareness or fear. If they're like that, I'm going to be like that. And Mama saying, don't be like those people. And if I'm going to be like those people who ask for ghayr Allah, ask for other than Allah, I'm going to be attributed to the very one that I asked from. If I ask you for something, I extend my hands to you, it's Allah that I'm really asking from. Just like bay'ah. What's that verse of Quran? Um, إنما يبايعونك يبايعون الله يد الله فوق أيديهم أو رسول الله. When they put their hands in your hands to give allegiance, they're not giving allegiance just to you. Their hands are in the hands of God. يد الله فوق أيديهم. Right? The one in front of me is not the one who gives. The one who gives is always Allah. And everyone in between me and him is just a dharya, a route to God. Sometimes the huquq of the poor people exist in the hands of me and you. Allah's giving to them and he's using us to give to them, which is a great blessing. We should ask Allah, Allah, give me opportunities of servitude. And this dua we're making, that make me like these groups. We see this actually in the Quran as well. In Surah Nisa, verse 69, Surah 4, verse 69, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. وَمَن يُعْطِيَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولَهُ, those who obey Allah and the Prophet, فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, they are with those people who Allah has blessed. Who are those people? مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ, with the prophets, وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ, those who are the honest ones, وَالشُّهَدَاء, the martyrs, وَالصَّالِحِينَ, and those who do righteous deeds. وَحُسَّنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا, and these are the best type of companions, the best type of people to be with. These groups, the prophets, the honest people, the martyrs, those who do amal salih, good deeds. And if I'm with them, I'm linked to them. But just like the Imam says, if you ask for someone who's not Allah and you think that they are the one who gives, then Allah will discard you and leave you to them. Go back to them. Those Daghut are the ones who will be raised with as our Imams in the Day of Judgment. It's so important to get this right. Allah is the origin. Yeah. Even the Imams take us to God. When we go to ziyarah, we ask for the Ahl al-Bayt, ask for tawassul, just like we do at tawassul. Ishfa'i and Allah. Come on, it's so obvious. Go to God with my dua. I ask you to supplicate between me, bayni wa bayn Allah. Go to God, take my dua with you and pray for me. That's the basis of what we're asking. Even though the language is like, Ya Abu Abdullah, atini, or oh Imam, give to me. What we're really, on its core, what we're saying is, ask Allah to give to me, because he is the origin of all of these good deeds, all of these, sources. And unfortunately today there is a lot of, actually I think it's always been the case, and it's just cropped up again, this year, through some scholars who, or speakers and public figures who want to make this an issue of, why do we ask from God? Is it in our tradition? Is it in our books? Well, firstly, yes, it is, abundantly. Secondly, is dua tawassul authentic, which we read? Yes, it is. Look at the chain. And even if you think it's not authentic in itself, we find it in so many and such a wide variety of our classical literature that you can't just discard it, even if you find one weak chain. And even if the chain is weak, there are other reasons why we should hold on to these du'as and why they're useful for us anyway. And what they forget is, people might get confused about this, but it's actually very simple. And it's simple right here in Nahjal Balagha. If you ask for ghayrullah, for someone who's not God, you'll be raised with them. Go back to them. And if you ask from Allah, He's the one who gives rizq like rain pouring from the sky, right? And even that's an example of where it's not the cloud which is actually sending the rain. And it's not the angel who's charged with dispersing the cloud. It's the Lord who charged all of them and put them in their proper place and ordained them in his lordship. Always go back to look for God in the origin of actions, inshallah. There's a question from Sister Fatima, which is, can you explain the bit about being afraid of Allah and no excuse being needed for it again? Okay, khawf of Allah is a separate thing, and the example being given here is a separate thing. Khawf of Allah, generally the ulama say, is what people say taqwa means, God, fear of God, right? But really it's being aware of God. It's being cognizant of God. And fear of God, for example, Ya Allah, Imam Hussein says, let me fear you as if I can see you. It's more, the way that's been described by my teachers to me is having fear of disappointing God, having fear of letting him down, having fear of not being close to him. I bring that fear. It's not the same type of fear of a ghadab of Allah, that you're going to punish me and you're going to destroy me. Because we say in Dua Kumay that even if you do, even if you put me in hell, Yunadika, you will hear me call back to you and say, Anta Allah, you are my Lord, Anta Rabbi. So it's not just that you're going to punish me, it's that I'm going to be far away from you. And inna dinu hub, this deen is love, as we've been told by the Ahlul Bayt. And when you love someone, you always fear being apart from them. You fear disappointing them. You fear something happening to them. You fear something happening to you. You fear not doing your duty to them. And the way that I understand the idea of khawf of Allah based on these arguments is Fear of God is fearing distance from Him, that I am putting between me and Him. It's being afraid of layers that I have put between me and God. And I'm afraid that I will no longer see Him. I'll no longer have a relationship with Him. It's not fear of what He'll do to me, it's fear of what I am missing out in how I deal with Him. So that's one example. It's found in a number of views. Actually, it's not just mine. I'm not just saying it's my view. It's the one that I agree with in my understanding of khawf of Allah. Now about not needing an excuse. So let me go back to the exact point. Um, واخشوه خشية لا يست بتعذير وأعمله في غيره رياه وسمعه. To the first part is واخشوه خشية لا يست بالتقدير. تعذير اعتذار, to have an excuse. Literally saying, I should be afraid of him so that I no longer need an excuse for it. For what? It here, lahu, means a thing which was mentioned before, which is something which he's cautioned me against. So these two things are linked. So فَاحْذَرُوا مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا حَذَّرَكُم مِنَ نَفْسِهِ. مَا حَذَّرَكُم is the subject here, which is what has been cautioned against. And um, بِتَغْذِيرِ is relating to that thing. So if I can clarify what he's actually saying is, the things he's cautioned me against, let me have so much fear of God that I no longer need an excuse for not doing those things. Or so I don't know an excuse for doing those things. Right? I'll say it again correctly. The things which have been cautioned against me by Allah, let me have so much fear that I don't do those things and then need an excuse for why I did those things. Because in the verse of there are so many verses of Quran and Hadith where we give excuses for why we do sins. This what example we looked at when we talk migration to Allah. Um, was this earth not wide enough that you just go somewhere else and not do that sin if those are doing it around you? And they're like, kind of mustadaf we were weak, and they're like, no, you could have just migrated. Excuse. Um, what's another good excuse in Quran? There's one in my mind right now. Oh, in the verse of Quran which is Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we say qalu bala shahidnakum, we give. The verse then continues and says, and then do not then say that you were not made aware. Don't then give an excuse. I think it's in our nature, sister, to give excuses for doing bad things, even when we've been caught. You might see this in kids as well, where they do a bad thing and like, why'd you do? And they're like, oh, it wasn't me. It was a pigeon who came and opened that jar and took some sweets, or I forgot that I'm not allowed, or I don't know. Like kids say all sorts of excuses for why they don't do things. They do things they're not supposed to do things. I think we're like that by nature. We make excuses for things that we shouldn't be doing. But this part is saying, I have so much fear of God. I don't even go near those amal which I'll later need an excuse for. I don't even go near them. I don't even put myself in that position where later I'm going to need to give an argument for why I did this thing in my relationship to Allah. Because we mentioned before, all things are one of two things. We interpret all things one of two, either dua of Allah, they are call of God, or rizq min Allah, they are rizq of Allah. I have no right then to do a sin or do something wrong. If everything He gives me is either a call from Him or a risk, virtues from it, it's a reward from Him. Like, what's my excuse left? There's no more space left. If He gave me something and I used it to go against Him, that's all from Him. So I fear Him as if I see Him and I know that He's the one who's giving me these hands. So I'm not going to use these hands for a sin and make some excuse. He gave me these eyes. They're His eyes that He gave to me. As you read in Dua Arafah, that you made me see. And from the womb, I opened my eyes. He gave that to me. So what's my excuse for using what's against Him? So khawf of Allah is also recognizing that He's the origin. Sister Fatima, I know that I'm sure you have many questions relating to that, but um, is in my answer, are there things there that do go towards answering your question, or is your question another question then based on what I said? Like, does it help? And of course, you can say no, and the problem is something else, and I'm happy to think about that as well. Oh, perfect. Well, that's nice. Thank you. Okay. But if it's not, you can just say that that didn't help, because then I can say something else and hopefully something sticks. like an arrow drawn by a gambler, hoping it hits, like in the first example. Actually, you never know. Have you noticed this? That you never know what point hits home in your heart. You never know like what thing gets you. Now, the wise ones know exactly what to say to the questioner. Inshallah, I'll get there one day. So my approach is just to bombard you with little fragments of knowledge that I've heard from my teachers and the hadith and hope that something works, inshallah. So this Fatima, good question, and I hope that does help, inshallah. Um, Now the Imam speaks about specifically about people who are rich and poor and how to treat them based on this strong methodology of knowing everything's from God. أيها الناس, he says, O people, إنه لا يستغني الرجل وإن كان ذا المال. No one, even if they are rich, for example, can do عن عشيرته without their ashira, their kinspeople, those who are close to them, your near ones, whether it's your family or your friends, but your inner circle, those who are considered of your tribe. We can discuss what that means, but those who are considered of your close ones, no one, even if you're rich, you can't do without them. You need them in your life. And you need them in your relationship with Allah, interestingly. وَدِفَاعِهِمْ عَنْهُ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. And their support, their hands and their tongues, you need their support of your ashira. هم أعظم الناس حيدة من ورائه ولمهم لشعثه. And they alone are your support from behind you, from the rear, and they can warn off any troubles that you are going through, right? And I'm going to continue and say, وَعَدَمَهُمْ عَلَيْهِ عِنْدَ نَارِ نَازِلَةٍ عِنْ نَزَلَتْ بِهِ. And they are the kindest of them when any trouble or tribulation befalls you. They are the ones who are going to be the kindest towards you. Who? Your ashira, those who are close to you. أن نزلت به ولسانه الصدق ولسانه الصدق يجعل الله للمرء في الناس خير له من المال يورثه غيره. And the good memory that you leave behind to them. So lisan on sidqin, the good word about you that's said when you leave this world, is يجعل الله, Allah makes it better من الناس في الناس خير له من المال, better than the wealth which you leave behind, which is inherited by people. يورثه غيره, other people inherit your wealth. More important than the wealth you leave behind is the good name of yourself you leave with your people. So now Allah has placed people at the core of my responsibility to Him, where you cannot you cannot get any support without those who are you need around you. Their hands, their tongues, they yadun wa lisanun, they are needed for your journey to Allah. And they're the most kind when you have tribulation and trouble. But it's the last part which shows you just how important the ashira are to you. Okay? Which is walisanun sidqin, a good word about you. Allah makes it the most important inheritance that leaves behind. God wants you to have a good reputation among your ashira, among your people. He wants that from you. And for in the eyes of Allah, this is more of a valuable inheritance to leave behind, that you were a good person, that you did good deeds, that you were, kind and all these things, than any wealth you're going to leave behind. That's so much more important in priority. That point I think is very clear. But here's what's not clear. Who is my ashira? Who are my people? Who is my group? Who are the ones I owe a duty to? Like, who are they? Is it my family? Is it my friends? Is it people of my nationality? Is it those who go to my mosque? Is it those online who I relate to, for example? And this is a very interesting point. So I'll ask this to all of you. Who do you feel is your ashira? Who are your people? Do you have a group which you think that I belong to this group or identify with this group? Do you have a group like that where they are people of your kin? Are they your family or your tribe or your community? Where do you find your ashira? What do we think? And I don't want to say there's a wrong answer because there's not a wrong answer. It's what you identify with, right? So who do you feel are your people? What group, if there is a group, do you feel like you belong to? seriously, like I know it's a hard question, but think about it. Think about what group you identify with as yours. Sister Zahra has a suggestion. Linking back to how we said the Prophet is like a roaming doctor, which we did say, طبيب دواء بالطب. It is to us to emulate and also be on the lookout because there are reasons for every individual, and God would have us cross paths with. The reason for every individual. Okay. So if I understand this point correctly, and like it's said in a very good way. So our ashira is those people who we're able to help and are able to help us, right? Like that's how you're that's what the thing you're using to understand who those people are. My people are those people who I can help and those help me. Even those who we would help are actually helping us achieve akhirah. Some of those are there for us to help, others are there to help us. Yes, this is Zahra. So am I right in thinking that for you, because of the way that we look at the Prophet as someone who heals and helps people, in your journey, in your path, in your life that you have gone through, those who you have helped and those who have helped you, is there a pattern to those people who those people are? Like, is there some? Are they of random description of who God just puts in your path? Are they of a certain group? Is there a way you can define who those group are? Or for you, is this the most important thing? Someone who in my life I've been able to help and is able to help me. Like, is that your ashira for you? And anyone else, please think about this as well. It's difficult to describe except your soul tribe. It is a strange term, but I think it is similar to what I'm describing. Your soul tribe, where you find your people, like those people who I'm from them. Like they're my group, they're my boys, or they're my sisters in faith, or like they are my community that I owe a duty to. Like, where do you identify with, right? Um, I like this word soul tribe. I will ponder on it, inshallah. But does anyone else reading this think that there is a group which they consider to be their ashira, their kinspeople, not necessarily their nationality or their family, which some people might say this refers to, but who is your family? Who is your group that you belong to? Sister Fatima has suggested mentors. Okay, interesting. Um, so you belong or you feel a sense of home with those who mentor you, those who have taken a leadership role in your life, for example. Would that also count for mentees, for anyone who you are doing that for as well then? So maybe your students or those who you are teaching or those who you are guiding on their path, are they part of your ashira, do you think? Because now, see, we're using something else to determine, okay, yes, proximity. So since Zahra's point is it's about help, and those who have helped and those who have helped me, that is the link between me and other people, learning from the Holy Prophet as the one who would roam around helping people. Sister Fatima's point is, yeah, but what about mentors? And actually, it's the same point about helping, but it's about who have I actively been close to in my life. And they're the ones I'm advising and being advised from. Interesting. Said Hashim, did you have a point you wanted to make?
I was gonna say maybe just generally the family, sorry, the Muslim family, I guess, as we are all connected, or possibly the imams. The description that it says about those ashira
Yeah.
is very much applicable to imams if we return back to them, I think.
Interesting. Interesting. Um, that's also quite high level because Ashira, like there are certain duties I have to them as well. So that puts on me a high duty to Ahlul Bayt that I owe them a lot of things as being of their kin, belonging from them. It means that basically I'm saying I'm one of their Shi'i, which is a very high thing to say. We say I'm wanting to be a Shia, but to say that I'm a Shi'i who the narration says have been created from the dust that was used to make the bodies and forms of Ahlul Bayt, who the Ahlul Bayt say are our brothers and sisters, who say they are from us. If I'm that level and they're my Ashira, that is such an intimate level of community with Ahlul Bayt to be their companion in that way. So maybe, but the broader view is one which more of us will identify with, I think. Inshallah, said Hashim, we can all identify with Ahlul Bayt in that way. The Muslim community, the Muslim globe. Maybe that's a better view. Um, but yeah, if it's Ahlul Bayt, like Zahra mentioned, there's a very beautiful reflection that imagine they're my Ashira. My Imam is part of my kin, for example. That is beautiful. But I like the idea that it's the Muslim community at large because look at the last section. Allah, um, ألا يعدلن أحدكم عن القرابة if there's anyone who's near from you, يرى بحل خساسة أن يصدها, who's near you, who wants something, or is in a state of starvation, right? If there's someone like that who's near you, you have a duty to them. They're close to you. They are قريب to you. بالذي لا يزيده إن أمسكه ولا ينقصه إن أحلكه. Helping them, this is very interesting. You should not stop helping them with that thing which will not decrease if you help them. So you should not withhold from them the very thing which will not increase if you withhold. And you should ولا ينقصه إن أحلكه. And you will not decrease in what you have if you give it to them. So whatever you've been given, it increases if you give, and it does not increase if it remains, if you keep it in your pocket, and not helping them. وَمَن يَقْبِسْ يَدَهُ عَنْ عَشِيرَتِهِ, and the one who withholds their hands from giving to their ashira. If you don't help them when they're in pain and in suffering, and you withhold one hand from them, فَإِنَّمَا تُقْبَسُ مِنْهُ عَنْهُمْ يَدٌ وَاحِدَةٌ وَتُقْبَسُ مِنْهُمْ عَنْهُ عَيْدٍ كَثِيرَةٌ. When you withhold one hand from them, when you are in need, and when your time of need comes, many hands withhold from helping them. Right? Shaykh Sharif Radhi says about this point that when someone needs something, you withhold one hand. Sharif Radhi, who compiles Nahjal Balagha, he comments on this. He says, this line, وَمَنْ يَقْبِسُ أَيَدٌ عَنْ عَشِيرَتِهِ, when you withhold your hand from your ashira, you're not giving one hand to them. When you're in need, there are many one hands not being given to you, many feet not running towards you, many bodies not acting towards you. Do you like how that feels? No, of course not. So when I withhold one hand, imagine when I need someone, how many of these one hands have been withheld from me. If I don't have that approach, that no, I owe something to them. I should have love for them. And the Imam ends the sermon, it's attributed that he ends the sermon by saying, وَمَنْ تَلِنْ خَاشِيَتَهُ يَسْتَدِمْ مِنْ قَوْمِهِ الْمَوَدَّةِ. The one who is sweet-tempered, خَاشِيَتُهُ, the temper is soft and sweet. They can retain the mawaddah of the people, the love of the people for good, in truth. If you are kind and loving to the people, you will maintain love with them and them to you. Mawaddah is two ways. Mawaddah fil qurba, for example, the Prophet says, love for the Ahlul Bayt is I love them and they love me back. It's a relationship. I have that with my ashira if I'm kind and good hearted towards them. So whoever you are, now look back to the question I said before. Think of who's your ashira, who do I belong with, what's my group, right? Like think of that same question. In them, there are some who will be poor, some who will be in starvation, and whatever I've been given by God, la yazalu, it doesn't increase if I keep it with me. وَلَا يَنْقَسِمُ عَنْ أَحْلَكُ. And if I actually don't give it to them, I don't keep it, I don't keep more of it. And if I do give it to them, I don't lose it. When you're giving wealth for your ashira, it's from Allah, like we said, and Allah will restore what you had. Now, that same ashira which you feel like I belong to, in them, sometimes you will need from them, and sometimes they might need something from you. If you withhold your hand from your ashira, get used to the feeling where you need them. And like Imam says before, even if you're rich, you can't do without them. Like they're not about wealth anymore. They're about your home, your community. Think of their hands not giving to you. And that same ashira is the one who'd be good tempered with them because you can have their mawadda, their love. Now, there's an argument to be made that because the word mawadda is used, and the same use is la as'alukum alayhi ajran illa mawaddata fil qurba. The Prophet saying, I want no ajr from you except love for my close ones. And the qurba, being close, is the same word here, which is those who are al qarabati, those who are close to me. Maybe this is linked, my ashira is the other lovers of Ahlul Bayt. Maybe. But then, my dear brothers and sisters, you have to follow it through. I have to genuinely look at them as being close to me. Every single one who lives and dies with the love of Ahlul Bayt, I have to consider them as close to me, as part of me, as we share a common root, a common essence. And if I believe that and I believe that to be true, then I have a duty to them. That when someone is poor or suffering somewhere in the world, I take it personally. I am suffering in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Yemen. That's me out there. And then that duty develops. So if your ashira is lovers of Ahlul Bayt, and this community in a very intimate way. My dear ones, we owe a lot to them. And inshallah, if you're in trouble, this community should be there for you as well. Inshallah. Okay, that's the end of the sermon. And it's also time for Salah in London already, for where I am at the moment. Are there any final questions or thoughts about this sermon? What anything that comes to your mind or anything which it makes you think about? What are your personal conclusions about this sermon? How did you find it? Sermon 23 of Nahjal Balagha.
Um, I remember a hadith very quickly. I could maybe say,
Please, brother. Yeah.
there is time. So this about the last point. You know, many times companions of the imams come and say, "Oh, Imam, when are you rising? We are around you. We are so many. We are all Shias of you."
Yeah.
And imams will respond differently different times during different times. I think this is Imam Kadhim that once. Now I don't know how to translate it properly, but once someone came to him and said, "Okay, oh Imam, like look, we are all around you. Why don't you rise up?"
Yeah.
So the imams look at him and say, and there were multiple people, and he appointed someone else that was also a Shia there, and he said, "Could he come and take money off you without even taking permission from you?" And then he says, "Of course not." And he said, "How conservative you are on your money. You are even more about your life. I want you to be so close to an extent where each one entrust one another, that you can trust your brother, your Shia brother, for your life. If you can't do that for your money, you are even going to be worse when it comes to your life." Anyway, this is always in my mind when it comes to living as a whole, as a family, and how close one Shia to another should be.
That is beautiful, brother. That is so beautiful, dear Sayed. And there are people like this. Maybe you've met them. There are people who are genuinely like this, where they'll like if you even indicate you want something from theirs, they would give it to you. And if the more they love it, the more they would give it to you. They are like this. And inshallah, I guess we pray that we can be like you guys, like them. Inshallah. Said Hashim, that's such a beautifully used hadith. Can you send that hadith on the WhatsApp group, inshallah? Is it possible so that I can check out the narration and ponder on? Is it okay?
Yes, inshallah.
Thank you so
I
much.
remember Sheikh Shamali once saying it, so I'm gonna go try to find the hadith and
From
bring
the
it
lecture.
back.
Good, inshallah. Inshallah.
Yeah.
Zahra's final comment for Zahra, and then we have to close. This sermon seems very linked to the things we are told about the establishment of a just society and a strong community in preparation for 12th Imam. Sister Zahra, you know how right you are. We're going to continue that exact point in next session on the letter to Malik al-Ashtar about establishing a just society and our 12th Imam. That was actually a very perfect transition, almost as if it was planned, but I promise you it wasn't planned. We're going to look at this exact point next week. So, inshallah, next week, please read the letter from the Imam to Malik al-Ashtar, the famous letter. Was it letter 54? I don't remember. Muhammad, can you put it in the group? Imam Ali's famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar. I've been lecturing it so much, I should probably know what it is now. Hang on. Letter 53. Please look at letter 53. عملنا letter to Malik al-Ashtar, and we'll continue our journey inshallah next week and finish and close the Nahjal Balagha book club. That's it. Take care. Remember dua and Eid Ghadir Mubarak again to everyone, inshallah. Have a great Eid, and thank you so much for today. علي ولي الله علي ولي الله علي ولي الله